Hey guys, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to set up the enemy attacks and also set it up so the enemies can chase the player if they get within a certain distance around the enemy. So we're going to have a sphere that's cast around the enemy to detect the player if he gets within a certain distance. And the reason we're doing this, first of all, it just makes sense to have the enemy start chasing the player if the enemy gets close to the player, right? That's just how games work. But another reason is the enemies currently have no idea the player exists, right? The player is attacking the enemy, and the enemy has no idea that anything is happening other than they're just losing health. They don't know the player exists whatsoever. And this solves that issue for us. So if we are within attacking distance, the enemy knows of the player, therefore the enemy can attack the player or can chase the player around. So that makes sense to inform the enemy of the player once they're within a certain distance. So to handle that, we're going to use the player component that we created in the last video. We're going to add a few things to it so that the enemy can actually damage the player the same way the enemy can be damaged by the player. So in our player class, I want to set up a couple properties. The first one being, let's have the current health. So it's going to be an integer, and I'm just going to make it, let's make it a float just to go along with the other one. And it's going to be current health. Okay, then we're going to have another property that's going to be a float that is the max health. And I said the other one, but is this? Yeah, it's just a float. But we don't need this anymore because we have stats. Because we have these. It's pretty cool. But these aren't properties because they're currently set in the inspector. And you cannot set properties in the inspector because of the serializer. So let's see. Do we want the ability to set these in the inspector? Or do we rather have them set, say if we get set them up in the start method? It's a good question. I think I want to just make them available in the inspector. So I'm not going to use properties for these. There are ways around the serializer not allowing them to be displayed by default in the inspector by letting us edit them in the inspector. But I'm just going to keep it simple and just make sure that they just are available in the inspector. But current health doesn't need to be something you can change in the inspector. I just want it to be currently visible there. So that we can see what damage is happening until we have some way to represent that, if we ever have some way to represent that. And until then, we'll keep it this way, but once we get to that point, I'll just hide it in the inspector, and we'll go from there. So what I want to do now is I want to set this .current health to be equal to this .max health, because whenever the game starts, I'm guessing all of their life is going to be equal to the maximum that it can be, because we can assume they've not received any damage just yet. So that's going to be how that works. I then want to have a simple public void. It's not going to return anything. It's going to handle the player taking damage, and I'm calling it take damage because I believe slime is called take damage, but I don't necessarily like how that's called, because when I'm calling it, it sounds like I'm telling whatever I'm calling it from to take damage, but really it's the object that the method belongs to that I'm talking to. So I guess that makes sense, just maybe not so much for me. And it's going to need an amount of damage to take. Now, that makes me question our choice of float for this, because I'm taking an amount. We'll see. I'm guessing I said that with a reason before. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. So I'm going to do int amount, so the amount of damage to take, and honestly, it's going to be the same thing. We're going to just use the same thing. We're just going to copy and paste that in here. It's going to be current health. Actually, since this is not a property, I do want to just make this lowercase, just like that. And there's no die method on the player. So let's just go ahead and make one real quick. It's going to be just like that. I'm going to set it to private. And die, for now, we're just going to log out player dead. Reset health. So whenever he dies, I'm going to set the current health to be equal to the max health. Because that means we can just keep dying over and over and over for testing purposes or whatever it may be. And this is current health, and this is max health because I changed the way that we define these. Okay, so if we get below 0, or if we are at 0 life, then we'll die, and that'll just long out that saying, hey, we're dead. But we need a way to do damage to the player, because currently the slime has no way of doing that. And like I said before, the reason, or the way we're going to handle this, of informing the slime that the player exists, is by doing a simple check in a radius around him every frame. And every time it's going to check, if it finds something that matches what we're looking for, it's going to be like, oh, okay, there's the player. Now I'm going to go after him. And if I catch him, I'm going to attack him. So that sounds fun, yeah? To do that, we're going to need this to be a nav agent, part of the nav mesh. It needs to be an agent like our player is. And to use that, in the newer versions of Unity, you have to include the namespace, or at least use it when you're referencing something from the namespace. But just to get rid of any confusion, I'm going to go ahead and include the AI namespace, which I don't have, but you would do it just like that, and that would allow you to do the stuff that we're going to be doing. But I'm in an older version of Unity because I have been since the beginning of this series, so I'm going to just stick with what I have. And this is going to be a private nav mesh agent, and I'm going to call it, nav agent because we're creative. And nav agent is going to be equal to nav agent get components, and the nav agent component is going to be on the slime the same way it's on the player. So I can just get component straight right here and do nav mesh agent, just like that. So now we have a reference to the nav agent that is on our slime. Pretty cool. So let's go ahead and add that to our slime. If I were to go to slime, go to add components. It has to compile. Add component. I want to add the nav mesh agent component. And for now, I'll keep the default values. I'm going to move this up. Because it's in the middle of everything there. Keep it right there. And we're going to leave it like that for now. What I'm going to do now is in our slime, we're going to be looking for a specific object whenever we're doing the checks around our slime. We're looking for the player. And the way we can handle that, so that we can send out some physics check, which in this case we're going to be using the overlap sphere. It's going to be checking for a certain layer, and this layer is going to consist of our player, or players if you have multiplayer in yours, however you want to handle yours, so that we can define what our slime is looking for to attack, and we don't have to look at everything and then decide what we want to go towards. We'll just only grab what we need. No reason to look at every object around us, because that would be this rock over here, and the ground, and the light post, and the sign, and that's all just useless waste of processing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my player. I'm going to go to layer, go to the bottom and go to add layer, and I'm going to add a layer called player. And now that I created the layer, I have to go back to player and then go to add player. Just like that. It's going to ask me, hey, do you want to apply this layer to everybody in the player, every child that belongs to player? And I don't want to do that, because it doesn't matter to me if the enemy sees my sword, or if the enemy sees my hand, or whatever I have. It doesn't matter. Only if it sees my physical object. So I'm going to say no, this object only. And in fact, we have no collider on this. So I'm going to add a collider to my player. I may just use a trigger. Well, see, our navigation is never going to necessarily run into anything. We'll just do a box collider, and it won't be a trigger for now. But I'm trying to think, will I benefit from it being a trigger, so that I don't get stuck on anything I shouldn't be getting stuck on, that the navigation, if it ever flips out and sends me through a tree or something, I don't want to really break stuff. I don't know yet. We'll see. We'll see about that. It may come to us having to do something with that. But for now, we'll be fine. So I want to be able to assign that layer that we just created to the overlap sphere so it knows, hey, I'm only looking for this layer. Anything on this layer, I want that. So to do that, I'm going to make a public, and I'm just going to actually, because that's a private, notice how we have no organization happening here. I'm going to make a public. We're going to assign it in the inspector because it's much easier than the other way of getting a layer mask. So we're going to do a layer mask, and I'm just going to call it Aggro layer mask. That's, again, I'm very creative. So that now allows me to go back into my inspector, and on, what's it on? It's on slime. If I go to my slime, I now have Aggro layer mask, and I can choose player. So now it'll only be looking for things assigned the player layer. That's good. That's what we want. And this is going to be handled in update. So in update, every single frame, we could do fixed update. Be a bit more efficient that way. That maxes out at, what, 50 frames per second? Which we wouldn't have to check more often than that. We actually should probably use something less than that because it's just us walking into the region. It's not something that's extremely important, like right when it happens. Fixed update's fine for now. So the overlap sphere that we're going to be using is through physics, and it's called overlap sphere, right? And now what this does, if I hover over it here, it doesn't actually give me a description. Never mind, I thought it would. It's just going to just send out, you know, like raycast, it sends out a ray to a point, and it can get any colliders along the way, and you can do whatever you want to with that information. Overlap sphere is going to send out, just imagine a sphere, and it's just going to exist around every single frame in this case, every fixed update frame. It's going to exist around the slime, and every single frame is going to check that sphere around the slime and decide if there is a collider that it is looking for inside that sphere or not. And we can define the radius of the sphere, and we can also define the mask it's looking for, and the position that it starts at. In this case, the position will be the slime's position. So we'll go ahead and do that. But we also have to take those values and use them somehow, right? So I said it's going to be looking for a collider. So this is going to return colliders. Notice it says collider. So an array of colliders, in fact. So what I want to do is I want to create an array of colliders every single frame. Oof. I would rather just assign to an array that I've already created every single frame. Let's do that. That sounds better. It's going to be collider within Aggro colliders. That's a terrible name, but I'm not good at names. And it's going to be, we're going to set it to be equal to physics.overlap sphere, and it's looking for a position. First off, it's going to be transform.position, which is this slime's transform component. Grab the X, Y, and Z position, and it's going to be the starting point. So this sphere is going to start at the slime center, and then we're looking for a radius. Well, the radius I want was probably going to be based on something, a stat of some sort. If you wanted to create a stat for this, however you see fit, but I'm just going to make mine about 10. And then it wants a layer mask, and we just happen to have a layer mask, which is called Aggro layer mask. So now our within Aggro colliders will be equal to whatever this overlap sphere finds, which is great. That's what we want. But how do we know if it finds anything? Because all it's doing right now is assigning the array the values every single frame. Well, we have to check. We could do this all in one line if we wanted to, but I would rather separate it just like this and say if within Aggro colliders.length is greater than 0. In this case, it's assigning them to an array. The array is 0 unless the player is within the radius. So if it is not 0, we know the player is within the radius. And that's what we want. So if it is, then we want to do something. We want to I don't know, chase the player. But in this case, we'll just test real fast. Oop, that's not how we test, is it? I'm going to do a quick log and say, found player, I think. Okay, so if everything works right, which it probably won't, we should have find player when I spawn. Found player, I think. It's saying that a bunch. When I get out of range, it stopped saying it. That's cool. Let me get back within range, within 10 units. Found player, I think. Cool. So now we can use that information because we know what collider we found. And we know if we find a collider, it has to be the player because it's the only one on the layer they were looking for. Or it could be multiple different players, right? You can assign that player layer to any player. It's weird to say. But we know that we found at least one player. So what I can do is use that to chase the player. So I come down here, I have a bunch of stuff. Let's go just right here. I'm going to do a void chase player. Just like that. So we're going to chase after the player. And within this, we want to do a couple of things. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to have the player stored on this slime if we get within the player, get within the range of the slime. So it's going to be a player object called player. So if we do chase player, I want to set this dot player equal to the player that we're chasing. So it's going to be a player player. This dot player is equal to player. That way we can use this outside of this method itself. Say if we want to do an attack and we want to attack that player, we can then go to perform attack and do player dot take damage because we have a reference to the proper player now, and we can just say take damage is 5. Right? So we could do something like that. What I want to do is do chase player, and I want to chase player is looking for the player component, and I am just going to pass it the player component that we found, which is within aggro colliders. I want the first one, the only one. We know if there is one, there is only one, or maybe there's two. So that's where you would that's where you would have to change this if you were doing multiplayer. And I want to do a get component player. Now this seems a bit well, it's only fixed update. It's not that bad. We'll see if we get a performance hit from this. I don't think we will. I don't think we will. It'll be fine. And then we want to do, so we have the information now in chase player. So I want to do the chase. So how can I do that? Well, I can grab the nav agent and do the destination, the same way we did the player, or do set destination. What is it called? Set destination, maybe. Looking for a destination. It's going to be player.transform.position. The destination it's looking for is the player, right? So that should just work like that. But we also want to do a couple of checks to say, are we close to the player? If we are within this amount of distance from the player, then we should be attacking the player, and we'll do an invoke repeating to attack the player constantly on a set timer based on maybe a stat or something. But for now, let's see, are we chasing the player? That's all we care about right now. Okay, so the slime is chasing me. That's good. If I go around this rock, does he go around the rock too? Yes, he does. Everything works out fine with that. That's cool. So he's obviously a little slow, and he turns very slowly. And that's just things you have to play with to get how you want. Angular speed, we know that we like a snappy speed there, and he can be a little faster when he walks. And the acceleration can be a bit faster. And the stopping distance will be about 2, given the radius of the agent and the radius of our player. 2 might work out okay. We'll have to see. Obstacle avoidance you'll want to play around with if you have multiple enemies chasing the player and you don't want them to necessarily just like get in a line and wait on you. They'll be able to avoid each other based on the priority you set. I'm not sure how much of that we're going to be needing, but we'll see. So let's see what he acts like now. Should be a little faster, a little snappier. Oh yeah, he's a little faster. I'm still a little faster, so I can get away. Let's see if I get out of range if I stop chasing. Yeah. So if I get out of range, he stops chasing me, which is okay, but he just sits there, you know. We may want to set it up later on where he goes back to where he started out, but for now, all we care about is him chasing us, and he is doing that. So now I want to see. Notice we set the stopping distance to 2, and I'm going to say if he's within that distance, if he's about that distance away, he should be able to attack us, because that's as close as he's going to get, and also that makes sense. So I want to first check to say if nav agent dot remaining distance, the distance between the current destination and the nav agent itself, if it is less than or equal to the nav agent dot stopping distance. Now we did this before with the world interactions whenever we move our player. So if it is less than or equal to the 2 units that we set, then we know that we're within range to do something. So what do we want to do? Well, let's find out. We want to invoke the perform attack method. And we're going to set it up to invoke itself automatically, right? So if I am attacking and it's going to be attacking me back, it's going to attack me back on a timer constantly until I get out of range from the attack. So let's see here. I want to do an invoke repeating. Now this is going to invoke a method that I define constantly as long as the nav mesh agent is within distance. It's going to invoke it based on a timer that I set. So what it's going to invoke is perform attack, and the starting time, the time that it's going to start the attack based on when it gets close enough to me, will be something like 0.5 or so, because we don't want it to wait once it gets to me. You know, once it gets to me, he should attack me. That's just how it should be. However you want to do it, it's up to you. And then we would set it up based on attack speed or something, but just for testing, I'll set it to attack me every 2 seconds or so, just like that. So now this should call perform attack every 2 seconds or so. Let's see what happens with that. I don't have a way to know if I'm taking damage. Oh, goodness. Oh, right. I kept that in there even though it is implemented. I'm not sure if I know that I'm getting damaged until I die. Player dead, reset health. What? Stop. Oh, I probably didn't set any health. I'm just dead. Yeah, so current health, max health. My max health is going to be 20. So I think it does 5 damage. So it should be 4 attacks. So if I go to player, though, I want to know when I'm taking damage. So I'm going to just log out. Call it player takes amount and damage. And then we can tell that we're taking damage and how much damage we're taking and how often we are taking it. Player dead. Okay, so I can tell you what's happening right now. It's working, but it's just constantly invoking that if it is within distance. It doesn't invoke it one time. Where's it at? It invokes it multiple times because it's already invoked. It just doesn't know that. So what I want to do is check to make sure that it's not currently invoked. So I'm going to do if not invoked, or if not is invoking, and call it the same thing, perform attack, then invoke. Otherwise, don't do anything. We're already invoking. We're already doing it every 2 seconds, so we shouldn't have to do anything. Now, if I just sit here, I should get attacked within half a second, and then every 2 seconds. Takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, dead. Reset health. takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, dead. Cool. So that works, but let's say, okay, let's test it with running away now, because it worked when I was up close. Let's run away. Takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, takes 5 damage, dead. So that shouldn't have been working, right? There's no reason for that to have, but it's not told to stop invoking if the player gets so far away. So to do that, I'll just say else, if we're not close enough, we're going to cancel the invoke. It's going to cancel whatever's invoked. In this case, it's perform attack. So to also, it would make sense that if we are within distance that we have set, that we shouldn't be setting the destination, because we know we're already close enough. Stop trying to set the destination. So I'm going to cancel the invoke, as well as only set the destination if we're not close enough. Going right away. Takes 5 damage. Takes 5 damage. Takes 5 damage. And dead. That shouldn't be working. What am I missing here? If not is invoking, cancel invoke. Let's specify that it's to perform attack. I don't think you have to do that, though. Which makes me question whether or not this else is actually working as I expected. Yeah, it's not. So the slime, let's see here. Stopping distance is 2. It's fine. Let's set it up. Let's take my player. I'm going to go out of 2D mode. We're going to take my player and move him away from the slime. And you probably notice how my camera it updated in the game view here, because in the attribute video that I did recently, I set up the execute in edit mode. Not important, just an example, so I still have it in here for some reason, but that's fine. If I were to walk up, I'm not taking any damage, right? No. Okay. So if I were to walk up now, get within range, player takes out damage. And the navigation's not being set. So that's telling me that this isn't working. And why isn't this working? That's a good question. Let's see here. If we're within distance, is this even happening? Not within distance. I don't know. I have my example up over my other screen, and comparing the two, I don't notice a difference. So not within distance. Chase player only happens if I'm within distance. So the cancel can't happen. I think I just realized that. So what does that mean then? How do I handle it? That makes no sense. I have to be within 10 units for it to exist. But then remaining distance has to be less than 2. No, sorry, more than 2 for my destination to exist. But there is no destination, so there is no remaining distance. Okay, so if I have to define this before everything, perhaps, if I get within distance now, it's going to chase me and say not within distance until he gets close to me, and then I'm going to take 5 damage. take 5 damage. I'm running away, not with a distance. Okay, so that was a stupid error, but that kind of thing happens. And it seems like, based on some comments, that you guys don't mind watching me find the errors. Because, you know, I'm doing this. There's not a whole lot of planning that happens. I kind of just write up the system really fast, and then I go through this video and show you guys how to write the system. That doesn't mean that I don't change things as I'm writing it again, or I don't make mistakes myself that you may make. So it would make sense, and I appreciate the feedback to watch me debug things sometimes, because you may have the same issue, and it may be something simple like that was. What was happening was I'm checking the remaining distance on the path that I have to see that if it's less than 2, but I don't have a path because I'm setting the path after I'm checking the distance. So I need to check the distance after I set the path. So that's how this is there. And that seems to work. So now, just to play around with this, I should be able to ideally bring my sword out, equip it. Oops, there's an error. Oh dear, what's the error? Stats. Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. I have power, toughness, and attack speed. I say that makes sense, but does that make sense? Why do I have this error? Oh, more debugging, yay! The stats don't exist that exist on the weapon, I imagine. So we got power, toughness, and attack speed. I wonder if this is a simple case of execution order error. Because player, if we set this up in awake, which happens before start, just to test if that's just that kind of error. Hopefully it just is, but probably not. It'd be too simple. Okay, so it is. So that's the fun thing about having no knowledge necessarily of the execution order for things without having to actually change it. So the way you can fix that is if you wanted to go to project settings, we've done this before, script execution order, you can actually add your player in here and make sure that it gets started before you need it to be started, and it gets started before the player weapon controller, for instance. So if I were to take now and take the player weapon controller and add it afterwards, just like that, and apply that, I can get rid of my awake, if that makes no sense to you, or if it does, however you're initializing all of your things, then this should ideally work because they're in the correct order. Player, the issue was player wasn't creating its stats until after player weapon controller needed them, so they didn't exist. So now, if I go to sword and equip, the stats exist on the player before the weapon controller requires them to function. So that's good. So now if I attack, wachow, nothing's wrong, right? So now, I'm going to walk in range of this enemy. He'll walk up towards me, he's going to attack me. Ow, run away from him. Then I'm going to approach him and whack him. I'm going to whack him. And he died. Okay, cool. So that's an advanced combat system. Oh. But that's what you're going to get. We're going to add looting and stuff to it, so it's going to be fun. And you can make your own cool attacks and stuff, but I don't really necessarily care to do that. So I'm not going to. Because we have, if I'm looking at this board behind me. Oh, goodness. After we do enemy attacks, which is this one, we have the character panel. We have the loot system. Questing and portals and monster spawners and a leveling system. The dungeon for the big finale where we put together a big dungeon with everything in it, with a quest to run down the dungeon and find an item and kill enemies and all kinds of fun stuff. And by kill enemies, I mean walk up to them and go, wapow, wapow. That's about the limit of it. But it's not about that. It's about having a base to build things on. And you definitely have that. Hey guys, if you have any questions, I would appreciate it if you could ask me over at GoGameGrind.com, or sorry, forum.GoGameGrind.com. As you can see, I get a lot of questions and we answer them here. It's easy with code and images and stuff like that. Much easier than answering questions in the comments, and I can actually keep up with these here. So that's great. GoGameGrind.com for more information about things. And if you want to support the channel directly, like support creating content directly on the channel, the best way to do that currently is patreon.com/GameGrind. And you can just pledge here anywhere from $1 to a bajillion dollars. A bajillion would be greatly appreciated. You'd get a nice thank you note from me. And you get access to the Discord server where we all just have a nice chat about game dev and what we're working on, and we can help each other with the simple RPG and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. And you also get what I'm calling an exclusive stream of tutorials that are written and not very great, but maybe something you'll be interested in. And there's a couple of things that I share in here only for patrons, such as some projects I'm working on, and I'll also be adding rewards that are some of my assets that I'm selling on the asset store. And that'll be available soon, and I'll definitely be making videos about some of the assets that I'm working on, just in case you guys want to buy them, and that'd be another direct way to support the channel. Because I know it sounds silly, but it makes sense. The more money that I can make from making things, the more things I can make. And that's how we get more videos, and that's how we get more content, is I have more time to make them. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave it a like, leave me a comment, and I will see you guys next time.